Hello, Lucas Lou. Today, Auntie Katie is going to read you this book called Mr. Tickle. It's by Roger Hargreaves. Are you ready? Are you sitting comfy? Mr. Tickle by Roger Hargreaves. It was a warm, sunny evening. In his small house at the other side of the woods, Mr. Tickle was asleep. You didn't know there was such a thing as a tickle, did you? Well, there is. Tickles are small and round, and they have arms that stretch and stretch and stretch. Extraordinary long arms. There's Mr. Tickle's house. Mr. Tickle was fast asleep. He was having a dream. It must have been a very fun dream because it made him laugh out loud, and that woke him up. He sat up in bed, stretched his extraordinary long arms and yawned an enormous yawn. Mr. Tickle felt hungry. So do you know what he did? There's Mr. Tickle sleeping. He reached out one of his extraordinary long arms, opened the bedroom door, reached down the stairs, opened the kitchen door, reached into the kitchen cupboard, opened the biscuit tin, took out a biscuit, put it back upstairs, in through the bedroom door, and back to Mr. Tickle in bed. There's him reaching for the cookie. As you can see, it's very useful indeed having arms as long as Mr. Tickle's. Mr. Tickle munched his biscuit. He looked out of the window. Today looks like very much like a tickling day, he thought to himself. So, later that morning, after Mr. Tickle had made his bed and cooked his breakfast, he set off through the woods. As he walked along, he kept his eyes very wide open, looking for someone to tickle, looking for anybody to tickle. There's Mr. Tickle, he's off on his walk. Eventually, Mr. Tickle came to a school. There was nobody about, so reaching up his extraordinary long arms to the high window ledge, Mr. Tickle pulled himself up and peeped in through the open window. There he is, reaching up onto the ledge. Inside, he could see a classroom. There were children sitting at their desks and a teacher writing on the blackboard. There's the teacher. He's got a funny moustache, hasn't he? Mr. Tickle waited a minute and then reached in through the window. Mr. Tickle's extraordinary long arms went right up to the teacher, paused, and then tickled. The teacher jumped into the air and turned around very quickly to see who was there. But there was nobody there. There's Mr. Tickle from the window. Mr. Tickle grinned a mischievous grin. He waited another minute and then tickled the teacher again. This time he kept on tickling until soon the teacher was laughing out loud and saying, stop it, over and over again. All the children were laughing too at such a funny sight. There was terrible pandemonium. There's the children laughing. Are you giggling too, Lucas? Eventually, Mr. Tickle thought that he had enough fun, so he gave the teacher one more tickle for luck and then very quietly brought his arm back through the open window. Chuckling to himself, he jumped down from the window, leaving the poor teacher to explain what it was all about, which, of course, he couldn't. Then Mr. Tickle went to town. There's Mr. Tickle going to town. And what a day Mr. Tickle had. He tickled the policeman on traffic duty at the crossroads in the middle of town. It caused an enormous traffic jam. There's the police officer. He tickled the greengrocer just as he was piling apples neatly in his shop window. The greengrocer fell over backwards and the apples rolled all over the shop. There's the greengrocer rolling backwards and there are the apples going all over the shop. Oh, gosh. At the railway station, the guard was about to wave his flag for the train to leave. As he lifted his arms in the air, Mr. Tickle tickled him. And every time he tried to wave his flag, Mr. Tickle tickled him until the train was 10 minutes late leaving the station, and all the passengers were furious. There's the poor guard. That day, Mr. Tickle tickled everyone. He tickled the doctor, he tickled the butcher. There's him tickling the doctor. He even tickled old Mr. Stamp, the postman, who dropped all his letters into a puddle. Oh, poor Mr. Stamp. Then Mr. Tickle went home. Sitting in his armchair in his small house at the other side of the wood, he laughed and laughed and laughed. Every time he thought about all the people he had tickled. There's Mr. Tickle chuckling. Yes. So if you're in any way ticklish, beware of Mr. Tickle and those extraordinary long arms of his. Just think, perhaps he's somewhere about at this very moment whilst you're reading this book. Could he be? Perhaps that extraordinary long arm of his is already creeping up the door of this room. Perhaps it's opening the door now and coming into the room. Perhaps before you know what's happening, you will be well and truly